Hello everyone, you're listening to Sinister Spotlight here at Mephisto's Castle. I am Jose, and for those of you who are interested in knowing, hey, what exactly is Sinister Spotlight? It is the regular podcast feature, which is debuted regularly here on the site, and the gist of it is that I have a guest who comes on every episode to discuss a film or TV episode that they have picked, and we just kind of take the time during the episode to discuss the highs and lows, mostly the highs, of said choice. Now, with me today for my second episode, I have none other than Bryce Wilson, who hails from Things That Don't Suck, and Bryce has very bravely braved the tunnel of dicks that he survived from a previous podcast episode of his to talk to us here today. Thank you so much for joining us, Bryce.
The box. You love it. On the Things That Don't Suck game. Give us the box. Oh, wait, that's the wrong franchise. Hey, Jose, thanks for having me on. Today, we are going to be talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre Dose.
Yes, we are, and it's looking like it's going to be quite the conversation indeed. And by dose, let me clarify that we are talking the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 from 1986, and not that slightly abominable sequel of sorts, prequel, reboot, whatever the fuck it was, called Texas Chainsaw the Beginning.
Slightly abominable is being way too generous.
Probably, yeah. And I probably insulted the abominable snowman by using that particular adjective to describe it.
Just while we're talking about that, because I would love to pretend that movie never exists, I think Outlaw Vern found the great part about what made that movie so useless. They show you the origin of it and why he finally decided to chainsaw. The big thing is he saw a chainsaw that was sitting there, and then he kind of like went over and picked it up, and that's it. That's the story of the chainsaw.
Yeah, and
He's
just
there's a chainsaw over there. It's on stump. Think I'll pick it up. Never know when a chainsaw's gonna come in handy.
Exactly, especially for making a franchise.
Yeah, I'm like, man, I don't know if I could live without knowing that Leatherface found that chainsaw that was kind of laying over there.
Well, yeah, as we mentioned, we are going to be discussing the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, which is Bryce's pick, and kind of as a somewhat, kind of as a given, we're going to be discussing in some small part the rest of the franchise, and unfortunately with this particular one there are certain lows that will probably have to be addressed at some time, but we will cross that horrendous bridge when we have to. So
yeah, it is worth noting that the franchise is actually set to hit an all-new low with a second reboot, which will be in 3D this time, because they just decided to come up with the worst possible idea.
Yeah, you did tell me about that, and personally, I'm pretty much dreading it, and I really don't understand what exactly. I mean, I guess I kind of understand, but I really don't understand why the 3D? What has caused this fad? That was so big, especially like in the 50s and 60s. What has caused it to come back, and why would such
$5 in the ticket price?
Yeah, I guess, and even when it comes to gimmicks, I guess they can't even make up their own. They just kind of have to resurrect dead ones from the grave and just reap the pennies of the public to no end. But to get us kind of started off, I want to ask you, Bryce, for the benefit of those listening, in your own dulcet tones, can you give us a rundown of what this movie is, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, just kind of give us a clue as to what's going on story-wise, so that some of the events that we discuss may not seem quite so random to our listeners here?
Well, I'd be happy to, Jose. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 takes place about 10 years after the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And basically what it's about is the Sawyer clan's gone mainstream, and they've gone from hanging out on this weird little backwater in Texas to actually operating a nationwide chili brand and their own theme park. In the meantime, kind of parallel to this, you have Dennis Hopper, who's playing the uncle of Sally and the immortal, most annoying character of all time, in the horror movie, Franklin. It's basically Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, Franklin's Revenge, because their uncle, who's played by Dennis Hopper in prime crazy form, like I said, is coming to get the Sawyers for what they did to his kin. So, in the meantime, there's this other main character who's a DJ who, thanks to these two just complete yuppie assholes who
my God.
in the beginning, is basically given a recording of one of the Sawyer's murders and the only proof that they exist. So basically, it becomes kind of a three-way thing where the Sawyers go after Stretch because she has this recording, and Dennis Hopper's going after the Sawyers for the revenge of his kinfolk, and it all kind of ends in a kind of a chaotic mess, almost a massacre, if you would. A massacre that takes place in Texas and involves chainsaws, oddly enough.
Wow.
The second one happened, which explains the title Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
You know what? It didn't really come together until you just explained it. Thank you so much.
Well, the thing that I love about this movie is, it was written by, I've got the guy's name, it was written by the guy who wrote Paris, Texas, which is one of the, artiest, it was one of the big art movies of the 80s, Inventor film. And I love that, I love the way that career went from Paris, Texas to Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 without missing a blink.
Yeah. They're the same thing when you really think about it, anyway.
Yeah. You're like, well, that's a stretch there, but hey, what are you gonna do?
Stretch, yeah. But and you mentioned the kind of how everybody's chasing after each other's tails. I was really hoping with everybody kind of pursuing each different party that we'd get kind of a cool Scooby-Doo type homage where they'd be running in and out of doors in a spooky old house, only to...
And they have the spooky old amusement park, so they totally could have pulled it off.
Yeah, just think about the things that could have been. It's really sad.
Well, like I said, I still think the movie we got was pretty funny, even sans Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
This is definitely a movie that's got some wild and crazy stuff, but I don't know if we want to get into that yet.
Oh, no, we will.
Okay.
We will.
So, yeah.
Foreboding.
Yes.
Little literary term for you. Okay. Well, that you really put it quite beautifully, as beautiful as I think anybody could, to describing half the crazy stuff that's going on here. And I also wanted to ask you, since this film has obviously left quite an impression on you, how'd you first come into contact with it, and was your immediate gut reaction somewhat the same as to your prolonged love for it, or was it completely different?
I'd say so. I'd say the big one that influenced me to get to see this movie was Keith Phipps' review on the AV Club.
Right.
And basically, I'd heard of this movie for a long time, but this movie's really only just in the past 5 years or so begun to gather a real cult following. It was always kind of considered the black sheep of the franchise, which in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise takes some doing.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'd always kind of dismissed the movie because the movie, is very it's so different from the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and we'll get into why that is for a bit. But I think, and the reason why I always choose to talk about this movie whenever possible is because I think people stop there. It's, they hear it's different from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre because, let's just talk about this now.
No, of course. This ideal time as any.
Yeah, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I'm one of those people who think that it is one, if not the best, then certainly in the top 3 horror films of all time. And that movie is almost just reality. It's like it's 3D before 3D existed. People always. It's weird because people always talk about it in snuff. I've been known to describe it as you're cleaning out your creepy old uncle's basement, and you find this roll of 16mm film, and you start playing it, and all of a sudden you're like, "Wait, what the fuck am I watching here?"
It's a good metaphor.
It has this real feeling of reality to it, but at the same time, it's not like Paranormal Activity or Blair Witch Project, where it's trying to be documentary.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like it goes beyond reality. I can only think of maybe a handful of other horror films that achieve this effect, and really the only one that's coming to me off the top of my head that's even remotely similar is the original Nosferatu. But it's got this intensity to it, and this vividness, and it's a nightmare. That
Yes.
movie is a waking fever dream nightmare, and by the time you're done with it, you're just wrung out and and killed. And that movie is almost alchemy as opposed to filmmaking. It feels like a one-off, and I think Toby Hooper's, who I have to say I'm not a really huge fan of outside of these two movies. I think his career has kind of proved it's a one-off. So then you have the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, and it's none of those things. It's not like this at all. And I think Cooper kind of understood that first film was alchemy, that you can't reproduce it. It's not a repeatable film, despite the best efforts of Platinum Dunes and all the other things. It's a one-off, and it's one of the great one-offs in cinema history. And the thing about it is, so in part 2, it takes a very different approach. It's very satirical and very funny. It's a lot wilder. It's one of the splatterpunk films of the 80s. There are scenes in here that would definitely be right at home in a Peter Jackson or Sam Raimi film. And for me, like I said, that's what the movie is to me. People it's just because it's a different experience does not mean it's an invalid experience. And I think a lot of horror fans hear it's different and shut down. So I like talking about it because it shouldn't be it's different, period. It's different, but it's different, but it does all this other kind of interesting stuff with it. And I credit Keith Phipps with giving me the inspiration to see it. So as for has my opinion changed of it at all? I don't think so. I mean, like I said, it's kind of it's a movie that I definitely acknowledge is flawed. I think it's a lot of fun, and I think it does some really interesting stuff. And I think it's just a blast to watch. So I definitely I've always kind of felt that way. So that's pretty much remained the same.
Wow, and that was really, really wonderfully said. I can't agree with basically everything you said about the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre more. It is literally, it seems like every single frame, every single second of that film that passes is just unrelenting. You have this massive build-up in the beginning, and then right from the minute that they step into the Sawyer house, it just does not stop, and it just runs you down.
Yeah, it's one of the most intense films ever made. I mean, like, even before anything outright horrifying has happened. I mean, God, the hitchhiker scene alone.
Oh my God, so creepy.
He's like babbling and talking about head cheese and stuff like that, and you're just going like, ah!
Rather not, no thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
But, yeah, you mentioned, this is something that really just kind of occurred to me just now, and just a random thought. You mentioned that TCM2 is really, in almost every way, and probably just every way, the basically polar opposite of the original. And you mentioned Sam Raimi, and I couldn't help but think, you know what? I hope I'm not getting off topic too much here. A lot of people, yeah, I guess it's meant to happen at some point, right? But a lot of people seem to, I guess maybe it's the same thing. With the first Evil Dead, it was there's a somewhat present air of humor in it, I think. Not quite as much as the ones that came after it, and that makes me wonder, why do you think that fans, I should say, have reacted the way they have with TCM2 being so overbearingly funny, to put it one way, as opposed to basically people embrace Evil Dead 2, and it's got straight out slapstick humor, and it's just wacky. Do you think there is a difference between the two films?
I do, and I think I just did a big Sam Raimi podcast with my buddies on the stick, and I kind of ended up being the one who's defending Evil Dead 1. And I really like that movie. And I think what makes Evil Dead 1 such an effective and interesting film to watch is it's got that real kind of confusion. I mean, it's almost got this really queasy sense of humor, while at the same time it's playing it nominally straight, you know. And I think that the difference, though, is that Evil Dead, even though the first one's a lot more serious, it's always been pretty wild. You know, it's always, you know, I mean, at the end, you got that big stop motion explosion.
Yeah.
It's always had very, you know, wild things. And I think the reason with the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre is so scary is because it's such a human horror. I mean,
right.
The Sawyers are, you know, they're not demons. They're not kooky guys, you know. Even though I know that the Next Generation or whatever tried to kind of move in that direction.
Yeah.
They are people, and they're sick people, and it's, you know, I mean, what's Leatherface but a literization of man's inhumanity to man? He can't talk, he can't speak, he doesn't have a face, he doesn't have a voice. All he is this big id that's going to kill you and eat you, you know? And that's terrifying, you know? I mean, and that's the, you know, there's nothing that happens in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre that's beyond the bounds of the possible. And I think that's why it's so scary. Like, even to the point of being like, you know, run out the house, you know, or something like that. There's not even like that slasher movie Scream moment where you can kind of call and be like, no, do this, no, do that. No, it's fate in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's the drunk is the, you know, it's the shadow on your lungs in the X-rays. The drunk coming down 110 miles on, you know, in the wrong lane. It's you just got off at the wrong road and talked to the wrong people, and now you're going to die in the worst way possible. You know, and that's what's so scary about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Because look, I love Evil Dead. It's one of my favorite horror films. On my list of anxiety, getting killed by a Kandarian demon, maybe number 49, maybe number 56. And, you know, it's right below Bad Batch of Peanut Butter and Gnawed by a Chihuahua to death. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you know, that's like scenario number 4 to me.
Yeah.
on my list of fears. So I think that's why. I think even though Evil Dead 1 is straight, it's skewed enough that when they did make the jump to splat stick in Evil Dead 2, it wasn't that big of a leap. I think with let me put it this way, they wouldn't have scored any kills to Oingo Boingo in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1. You know? They're definitely playing by different rules in part 2.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I didn't even stop to consider the supernatural aspect of it in my dreamy thoughts. So that you're very very apt observation there. It's definitely in that perspective. It's definitely able. Someone's definitely more able to accept the reality of all the films that followed Evil Dead 1, as opposed to going from Sally Hardesty being sliced to death practically by the hitchhiker to Chop Top eating brain parts on the edges of his metal plate in his head. It's quite the different vibes going on there between those two respective movies.
Yeah, it's a leap, all right.
But speaking of that, people should know that despite how gritty and just unrelenting the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is, it definitely went down quite the wacky path, and it got more and more ridiculous with each entry. So Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
You tell them, I really liked the way that you phrased your theory earlier. Now would probably be a good time. And your theory was ironically proved by real life right after you gave it to me. So why don't you go ahead and lay that one out?
What was my theory?
The theory about how each entry in Texas Chainsaw Massacre is like the weird entry that doesn't fit.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Thanks for reminding me of what I was thinking. I appreciate that. But No, yeah, just to kind of give you guys an idea of what we were talking about before, I brought up the point that in each in almost every horror franchise, you have at least one entry. Usually, it comes later in the series that just comes completely out of left field. Like Hellraiser, for instance, you have Pinhead in space all of a sudden, and you just have these wacky entries that obviously the people behind it have said, "Hey, people are still watching this. Fuck it, let's just put this guy out in the ocean, or have." Let's go back into his childhood and talk about things like that. Just you have entries like that in a lot of horror franchises. With Texas Chainsaw Massacre, after the original, it seems like that's what they're doing with every movie that comes out after it. They're trying to make it wackier and sillier. It's not like it's a consistently good series and then there's one odd duck out of the bunch. They're all odd ducks. They're all
Yeah.
weird and bizarre.
Yeah, it's got probably the worst continuity between horror movies.
Definitely. Oh my
Ever.
god. Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
part one and two kind of add up, but then like two and three absolutely make no sense, and then three and four don't go together at all. And then
Matthew McConaughey doesn't
but,
go with anything anyway.
let me just go ahead and say that the Platinum Dunes ones are just terrible. I loathe those movies, and I don't know if I hate it quite as much as I hate the new Nightmare on Elm Street. But it's pretty fucking close. I mean, Mark Nipsel is a terrible director, and you can tell he does not give a crap about it. Nobody understood what made the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre work, who made either of those films. They're not frightening. They're just kind of sick. They're not fun, and they look like crap.
Yeah,
so
they're pretty dark, literally. Like, you can't even see what the fuck's going on for half the time.
Exactly, and I mean, you got Arlie Ermery, and God bless him. I'm glad he's able to get it back every now and again.
Yeah.
He's probably the one bright spot in that movie. But I mean, that just tells you how bad that film is. That I'm not even able to enjoy Arlie Ermery that much.
Wow.
And,
Yeah, that's
like we said at the beginning. It's deja vu all over again because the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre isn't even going to be in that shitty reboot. It's like
it's a reboot of the reboots.
It's a reboot of the reboot, and so the snake will beat its tail and destroy itself.
Oh, was that the Bat Phone, by the way?
That was me. My bad.
No, that was fine. I understand. You guys got to understand. Bryce is a superhero, so he may be apt to go say the day at random points during the podcast.
Yeah. But yeah, it's but I do really like the first exchange. I mean, this second one, and part of the reason why I like it and like talking about it, I think it's just kind of a strange movie, is that it's one of the, I think, the few horror comedies where, I mean, most of the time you're gonna get some bleed over. The movie's gonna be like something like Shaun of the Dead. It's maybe got a few good horror moments, but that's a 90% comedy, 10% horror movie.
Right.
And then you can like reverse that with something like the Howling, which is 90% horror movie, 10% comedy. There's only maybe this and An American Werewolf in London are the only two I can think about where when it's funny, and when it's scary, and never the twain shall meet. It's like It's not like the funny parts are distracting from the scary parts to me, and the scary parts are distracting from the funny. It's when this movie is funny, and then it will do a hairpin turn and just be completely brutal and completely intense, and then it will go back to funny again. And it really there's no overlap between the two things. They don't taint each other, and that's what I really admire about the film.
Right. Well, personally, I believe that it may be easier for people to pick up more so on the funny aspects of this film. And I felt like I wasn't, until you cleared it up for me a little bit, I wasn't really able to detect what were the truly frightening scenes, except for maybe a few. So, would you like to kind of take the time to discuss just what exactly, for you, some of the most gut-wrenching scenes are, and the ones that are really hard to watch?
I really think that the hammer scene in that where they kill basically, let's back up to the plot thing. Basically,
Okay.
the Sawyer's track, our DJ hero to her radio station, and Bill Moseley comes in, who is at his Bill Moseley-tastic.
Oh yeah.
This is the Bill Moseley performance, and you can basically just see. You watch this thing and you can see Rob Zombie taking notes off screen.
Oh, practically, exactly.
They're going, do that. So,
you remember that part? I want you to do it here, only better.
And it's I don't know. And so basically, what happens is, so Leatherface and Bill Moseley come in to get Stretch, and they got one of the great jump scares of all time, where Leatherface is
oh my god, yes.
And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I need to change my pants.
I was personally. I'm putting that out there. I had to change my pants, and I apologize, America.
We appreciate your honesty on that one.
You're welcome. Vote for me.
so as Leatherface goes after Stretch, Bill Moseley gets her extremely unlucky friend and basically beats him to death with a hammer. And this shit is grisly. I mean, it is a grim murder. I think it's one of the toughest killings in 80s horror films, because it is so prolonged and so cruel and so. I mean, it's tough to watch. It actually does make me nauseous because it keeps cutting back to her trying to get away from Leatherface, and you're like, oh, thank Christ, they finally stopped him, from beating this guy's head with a hammer, and then cuts back to it for 5 seconds. You're like, oh God, please stop showing, this guy getting his head beaten with a hammer.
Yeah.
Every time you think it's done, it's not done. It cuts back half a dozen times maybe.
Right.
And man, it gets you queasy, no doubt about it. And then to be able to go right from that to Dennis Hopper being woo, you usually don't get that in the same movie. You usually either get Dennis Hopper going woo or the gruesome hammer word. I think that the fact that the movie is able to juggle those two tones is what really kind of makes it a keeper.
Yeah, definitely. For sure. Speaking of hammer deaths, by the way, when I saw that scene, which we just discussed earlier, when I saw that scene, I couldn't help but be reminded, and it comes up later in this movie, TCM 2, of the scene from the original where the Sawyer family wheels out Grandpa, and he tries to take a crack at, sorry, I had to throw a pun in there, he tries to take a crack at bashing Sally's head in with the mallet. And you get that, like I said before, that seems to be one of the few things that carries over from the original into this sequel intact, practically intact, because it is, like you said, it is prolonged, and each time, with every swing of the hammer, you're thinking, okay, they're going to stop here, and this is going to be the end of it. But no, it just keeps going and going, and again, with the same effect from the original, it basically just, like you said, drives you crazy, and you're just left exhausted at the end of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's funny that if we're talking about that part, the repeat of the Grandpa Hammer scene is one of the very few times that the movie consciously calls back to the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, most of the time it does it. We're talking about what happens at the end here, basically, and it's funny because I think it's one of the very few times that the movie calls attention to the original, and as a result, it's one of the very few times that the movie fails to me. Because basically the first one is, you're talking about that feeling of a nightmare, and that's definitely one of the scenes, because they wheel Grandpa out, and he's just this feeble old mumbling thing with drool on his, coming down, and his wrist is so weak that he can't even hold the hammer, and it's just this image of this horrible shrunken old thing trying to beat the life out of this young woman. It's just this terrible vision.
Definitely.
It kills you, and man, they just don't pull it off in Part 2, and I think that that's kind of the best argument that you can make for the approach that Tobe Hooper took for Part 2, because, yeah, you know, you might not like that it's different, but look what would happen if they did try and replicate the first one. It would just be
as feeble as Grandpa.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. As feeble as Grandpa, exactly. So say what you will about this film, but it's much more crazy as Bill Moseley than it is feeble as Grandpa.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of the actors, definitely one component of this film I wanted to touch on was Dennis Hopper. I think Hopper, just as an actor, is probably one of the most interesting people out there in the films that he made. He's just so fascinating to watch, and I wanted to ask you, do you think, because for the most part in the movie, I mean, yeah, for like 98% of the movie, Hooper just Hopper, sorry, excuse me, Hopper, jeez. Um, yeah, wow, gee, that sounds like somebody took a mallet to my head, right? Dennis Hopper just plays the entire thing seriously. You do not doubt for a second that this man had members of his family viciously killed, and now he is out to enact some goddamn vengeance. And in a movie like this, it is very easy. I mean, look at Bill Moseley to ham the shit out of a role.
Right.
So I wanted to ask you, do you think that, I mean, what is your opinion on just Hopper in general? Do you think he is playing it stone faced for the most part and realizes some of the comic value, or do you think he's just, dead straight all the way through?
Well, you know, I love Dennis Hopper, and you know, part of the reason I love Dennis Hopper is because, you know, this man made some great movies, but he also showed up in some of the shittiest movies I've ever seen. For example, let's not forget The Crow, Wicked Prayer, where he is featured as a gangster called El Nino, and refers to Satan as Big Papa OG.
Wow.
Dennis Hopper was no stranger to terrible films, but when he died last year, I did a write-up of my 5 favorite Dennis Hopper performances, and this was right near the top. And, you know, I think the answer to your question would be a little from column A and a little from column B. I mean, he's definitely, I think he just gets the tone of the movie. And just like I said, the tone of the movie is able to make these hairpin turns between comedy and horror. I think Hopper is able to make those exact same turns. I think he plays it both comedic and straight. And, you know, he's got some just great moments, and I'm quoting this guy's Outlaw Burns review again because it's such a great review, but he mentioned that Dennis Hopper was the only person to ever invite himself to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
That's a good point.
That's exactly who he plays. He plays it as someone who would be like, a bunch of cannibals? Yeah, let's go. You know, let's do it.
Sure, why not?
Yeah, and you know, he's just got these great moments when he comes in there, and my favorite moment of this performance is he says to himself, he goes like, "Lord, show me what I fear, so I don't fear it no more." After he's kicked in a mural of Daniel Boone that has a bunch of intestines behind it, so he comes rocketing down through this weird amusement park where the Sawyers are living, and he's singing at the top of his lungs that old hymn, "Bringing in the Sheaves," and they cut away from him like screaming, "Bringing in the Sheaves," and showed the Sawyers hearing it for the first time, and these guys who we've just seen like dominating and killing and naming through this whole movie, they get this look on their face like they're about to shit their pants. like what the hell is coming towards us? What is crazy enough to come towards us in our own lair with a chainsaw, screaming, "Bring in the sheaves" at the top of their lungs?
It's probably the Avon lady.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, but no, it is in fact Dennis Hopper.
I love it when he comes in, they ask him who he is. He goes, "Yeah," because he comes in there and they go, they're like, "Who the hell are you?" And he goes, "I'm the Lord of the Harvest." And the cookie goes, "Not a health food joint?"
Yeah.
Okay, it ain't a health food joint, it's a Killing Sawyer's joint.
Yeah, like you said, much like Leatherface, was in the original, where you mentioned that he's this unstoppable force. It seems like Hopper is that unstoppable force in the sequel. He just is
Exactly.
not taking any polite answers from anybody. He's just there to take a pound of flesh from each person or die trying, basically.
Yeah, very, very well put. They have found both the unstoppable force and the immovable object, and both of them are Dennis Hopper.
And two
um,
chainsaws.
yeah, two chainsaws exactly. But no, he plays it. I think he plays the role, like you said, very well. He really does feel like someone whose family has been murdered. And it's interesting. One of the things that ended up being cut from the movie, and I don't know if this made it into the final draft of the film, so I don't know if this informed Dennis Hopper. And I mean, I don't know if it made it into the final draft of the film and then was cut out later, or if it was just in one of the early drafts. But either way, I can see this almost informing. So I can't say for sure if this informed Dennis Hopper's performance, but it was going to be the twist because the whole movie is about family. You know, they're always saying the Saw's family, the Sawyer's their family, yada yada yada. But it was going to turn out that Stretch was his illegitimate daughter. You know, which might have been one plot twist too many. But he does play. You can almost kind of see it, you know, in the bond that the two of them have. And I think that's one of the things that really does set this film apart from some of your other 80s horror programmers, because you've got two really good protagonists in the film. And I mean, 80s horror to a certain extent, well, all horror to a certain extent, is always about the monsters. But the 80s in particular, the 80s gave us some great monsters. But they didn't really give us that many interesting leads. I mean, protagonists, because it was always all about the monsters.
Right.
And I think you know, Stretch is a great final girl. You know, she's independent, likable, and you know, the woman's kind of playing. You know, you just want to be like, is that Holly Hunter? But it's not Holly Hunter. It's just Holly Hunter's unacknowledged clone.
Yeah, right.
She does a really good job in it, and Hopper, as we said, just kind of steals the show. So it's one of the few movies where you're not going like, "Hey man, bring in the monsters. I want to see something interesting."
Yeah,
you know?
no, you definitely bring up a good point in that. Likeable protagonists in 80s movies are really hard to come by. Usually the best ones turned out to be the final girls, just because of how resourceful and that, you know, kick butt attitude without, you know, being snarky or anything. They just, you know, they're full of tact, and they're, you know, and one of the cool things, yeah, at first it kind of annoyed me, admittedly, but one of the cool things is that and I guess in a way a lot of the final girls are like this. Stretch is not she's not putting on a front when it comes to being scared lifeless of something. She screams so much through this movie, and like you said, there are a lot of things for her to be screaming at. She's being chased by a guy with basically two faces and this giant tool of death. There's a guy with a metal plate in his head who likes to eat little parts of his brain and hammer people's heads in, and then you got this kooky old man who is determined to turn everyone around him into processed sausage. There's a lot of stuff to scream at, and yet
I would be screaming if I was in her position.
yeah, yeah,
Probably a lot more shrilly.
yeah, right. but throughout all of that, she still remains, even by the end when you see her, and I personally I really love this during that last shot where you see her at the top of Mount Crumpet or whatever the hell it is, and she has the chainsaw in her hand and she starts dancing, just like Leatherface did in the original. I thought that was really cool. Some people may consider heavy-handed or whatever, but I thought it was really cool. It was a nice twist on that iconic image from the original, but this time it was the heroine who had the chainsaw, you know, basically as a symbol of victory, and it was just a very cool moment, and it's one of the things that just made her character all that much more enjoyable.
Yeah, it's a killer moment, and like I said, I wasn't able to confirm this, but we had been talking about this earlier. Where I think it's not on the DVD, but depending on what cut of the movie you get, it apparently some cuts pans over and shows that the entire time they've been like not even a mile from the interstate, like that which is another kind of inversion because part of the thing that makes the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre so creepy is the isolation of it. Is
exactly, yeah.
There's nothing out here but you and the Sawyers, and when you talk about I think that's a killer ending with the inversion with her getting to do the chainsaw dance. But then, because that is just one of the iconic images of horror, and seeing it turn from an image of fear to an image of empowerment is really kind of interesting to me. But then that added slice of the whistle of oh no, this isn't happening out there. This is happening in here. This is happening down the street, and it's just kind of another interesting twist on the movie.
Definitely, yeah. That would have been very that would have been very interesting to see, and it kind of touches on an aspect of this movie that a lot of people seem to discuss. In a way, that little snippet you mentioned there about them being so close to the highway, so close to the real world, so to speak, it touches on some of the underlying themes that a lot of people claim this movie have, really with the Sawyer family going capitalist and opening up this giant eating enterprise, and it kind of plays on some of those common, the themes of the 80s, basically, and that's very interesting. That final touch would have really probably sunken that point even further into people's brains.
And I think that's another great part about the humor in this movie is it's really pointed humor. It's not just dumb gore jokes, like you see in a lot of horror comedies. It's the whole idea of capitalism and cannibalism is ultimately linked. It's on a certain extent it's an easy joke, but that doesn't make it an invalid joke. And because that's it. It's basically the Sawyers as Reaganites, and it's kind of interesting because, to a certain extent, I was kind of thinking about this in the gear up. That was in there a little bit in the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre because the phrase I always hear for the heroes in that movie were post hippies, and they are there. They're not. Sally, I guess, is a sympathetic character, but mostly because anyone who that all happens to would be very sympathetic. But it's not a crew of pleasant people who are driving around in that van. Even Franklin aside, who is I'd love to see the death match between Franklin and Shelley for who takes the most annoying character in the horror film beings. Forget Freddy versus Jason. I will pay damn good money for Franklin versus Shelley.
Cage match.
Yeah, have the line of put them in a cage and make them fight. Who wins? We do.
Yeah, right.
I guess it's very there was always that element of the idea that the Sawyers are the reactionary element in society. They're the good old boys. They're not the good old boys, but they're the ones who are going to put the post hippies in their place and say, take off those fucking earth shoes. You're going to be
But kind of a drastic way to get them to cut their hair, I think. But whatever works.
Right, exactly. But so I think that it's, even though it's certainly played up a hell of a lot more than in the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's right down to their uncomfortableness with sex. I think it's always been there. This one just kind of brought it to the forefront. They made the subtext text, and I think they do a pretty good job with it. That whole scene with Cookie at the chili cook-off, he's just excited, and then he's driving down the road just bitching about regulations as Chop Top and Leatherface are, butchering meat back there.
Right.
Everybody's trying to tell me what to do. They're basically, tea partiers who got hungry. And I think that it does a pretty good job with the satire. It's, like I said, it might not be particularly subtle, but that doesn't mean it's not well done.
Right. And none more so is that more clear than the scene talking about the sexuality angle here, and I know you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, please. I have absolutely. There's nothing. I have no defense. There's nothing to say except like, man, I bet you that looked really good on the page.
Exactly.
Why don't you go ahead and tell us what we are shaking our heads in disbelief about?
Well, just because for those who have not seen this movie yet, and for those who are, they're probably giggling, giggling like crazy right now. There's a moment in this film where it's the part where the Sawyers attack the recording studio, and while Bill Moseley is busy away going to town on Elmer Fudd's head with a hammer, Leatherface has cornered Stretch in the sound booth, and he eventually breaks through the wall with his chainsaw. Yeah, it's feasible, I guess, right? And he has cornered her on top of a cooler, I guess, just to keep refreshments. Now, not only is Stretch in some very short, some very short cutoff jeans, so we get to see those legs, which I'm sure her name was derived from. She's has her these long legs of hers spread over this cooler, and what's
the legs that you refer to as gams?
Yeah, exactly. So what's a Leatherface to do other than drive his raging chainsaw blade into the ice of the cooler between her legs?
He basically dry humps her with the chainsaw.
Exactly. In so many words, he dry humps her with his chainsaw. Now, mind you, while he's doing this, the blade is going away in the ice, and it is spraying water on Stretch's screaming face. Do I really need to go on anymore? Do I really need to go on?
It's just as bad as it sounds.
It's even worse than it sounds.
There's some stuff where you'll hear people talking on a podcast or writing, and you're going, "Oh, surely they're exaggerating for comedic effect." We ain't.
We ain't, and stop calling this Shirley, because it is terrible. Well, it's not terrible. It's just really, like Bryce was saying, the subtext from the movie, the original, has definitely become text. It has become super text.
Yeah, it's become unmissable text. Yeah, you really do want to take a shower after that scene. And the thing is, I understand why they did it, and the whole idea of Leatherface basically falling in cannibal puppy love.
Yeah. Cannibal puppies. Wow, that brings an image.
That's a bad.
I'm not gonna be able to sleep at night now. Thanks, Bryce.
So the idea of him, kind of starting to develop feelings is, makes a certain amount of sense, because like they said they want the DVD extras, they say they wanted him to play it as a rebellious teenager. You can definitely see that in other elements of his performance, like he's listening to his headphones, throwing up the horns and whatnot.
Yeah.
But God, you talk about on the nose. If you think the satire of Reagan was on the nose, wait till you see the chainsaw dry humping scene. My favorite, though, sexual discomfort scene in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, though, is when Cookie decides to somewhat belatedly, because the guy's got to be at least about 30, he belatedly decides to have the talk with Leatherface.
Yeah.
And when he finds out that he's been hiding Stretch, so he kind of like goes up to him and he goes, well, you can count on your family and you can count on the saw. And then he kind of stops and he goes, sex? Well, nobody knows what sex is. And this is the side of this guy who you've been watching, cook people and chop people up and, get into the gore. Being completely uncomfortable with sex is hilarious to me. And the way he plays that off just cracks me up every time I watch it.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those queasy pants moments for sure. But nothing really beats just that the eye trauma that goes on when you see the snaggletooth Leatherface drive his chainsaw blade right between Stretch's legs.
And I think that there's probably no scene in this movie that has kept it from gaining its cult following more than that scene. It's kind of like how you have to. It's like full disclosure. You're talking to people. You're like, oh man, yeah, this movie's great. It's got some really funny stuff. It's got some crazy scenes. There's Oingo Boingo in it. Bill Moseley's great. Dennis Hopper's great. I don't know. One of the first dry humps this woman with the chainsaw, and they go, wait, what? And you go, oh,
don't worry about it. You'll see.
About the Oingo Boingo? No, dude, about the chainsaw dry humping. Oh yeah, that. It's
you know, it's whatever. I mean, hey, come on, we're all grown-ups, right? I mean, who hasn't dry humped a chainsaw at some point in their life, am I right?
That's when you say "am I right?" spelled A-M-R-I-T.
Yeah, exactly.
Am I right?
Come on, man. But yeah, and speaking kind of as of that rite of passage, if you want to call it that, I noticed at some point in your blog, and I think you told me it was the very first entry into Things That Don't Suck.
It was indeed.
Yeah, that it was basically a review of sorts of this movie, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. And you mentioned in that you actually got the chance, and unfortunately not a lot of horror fans get the chance to do this, so I am insanely jealous. But for those like me out there who haven't gotten this type of chance, why don't you kind of delve into a little of what your experience was like seeing Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 dry humping chainsaw in all in a theater with a live audience?
Yeah, it was pretty great because I saw that movie at the Arrows from Dusk Till Dawn Horathon, and I will go to the Arrow has got the single best Halloween programming period, and I will go to the Alamo Draft House of the New Beverly in my cowboy boots and say that it's the guys behind it it's been the same guy for the past 5 years, and he always puts together an amazing show. And that was maybe the best lineup that they ever had. And they played it right after they played Dead Alive and
nice double feature.
Jackson film, and that was almost more like being at a rock concert than seeing a movie. But they got the audience so primed and so into this film. It was really pretty ideal. If you have a time machine and can get to Santa Monica in 2009, I highly recommend going to see Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the Arrow Theater that night. But no, the crowd got into the movie, really killed. And so I think it's a shame that the programmers don't play this movie more because at least speaking from personal experience, it got one hell of a reaction from the audience I saw it with.
Yeah, I can only imagine, just with, like you said, with everybody just pumped up to the brim with elation and excitement after you see a guy literally mow down zombies. And then you go from that right into Dennis...
Oingo Boingo.
Yeah, Oingo Boingo.
We kind of skipped over that first scene, but man, talk about a great scene, because it just makes you, hate those two... It sets the tone for what that movie is perfectly, because it's these two douchebags are basically driving to a Texas football game, and they're harassing Stretch on their futuristic car phone.
It's so groovy, guys.
Yeah, it is groovy, and they basically piss off the Sawyers by playing chicken with them. So the Sawyers drive up alongside of them, and they have just, for whatever reason, decided to fuck with these two particular individuals.
Yeah, for no other reason other than the fact that they drove them off the road.
Yeah, and they basically have these, even though they drove them off the road, you would expect them to, just go up and chainsaw them to death. But they decided to really mess with them, because what they do is they take a corpse, who is, if you're paying attention, the hitchhiker from the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, whose corpse they have preserved and turned into a puppet.
Really? I had no idea.
Yeah, and Leatherface is operating the puppet corpse. It's one of the few ideas of continuity in this series.
Wow, that
he's
makes it...
operating the puppet corpse while Oingo Boingo is playing, and it's grisly, demented. It's one of those fun scenes we're talking about, and it's just too much fun watching these two guys get their just desserts.
Oh, definitely. And by the way, for those of you who listened in earlier when we were talking about the rarity of likable 80s protagonists in horror movies, just take a look at these two douchewads and you will know exactly how rare those type of characters really are, because they are the prime example of just two yuppie assholes who...
They're just they're fodder, and
Oh
they're
my,
fodder in
yeah,
a
they're
sense
dog food.
where you see them and you're like, oh, they're gonna die. They're gonna
Yeah, no, nobody that stupid can live in a movie like this.
yeah. They just go, oh yeah, they died all right. So that was awesome.
Yeah, they're all messed up. But yeah, we're kind of drawing to an end here with the conversation, and as just to kind of wrap up really quickly here and kind of encapsulate some of the things we were talking about here, I just wanted to ask you point blank, this being the Sinister Spotlight, Bryce, why did you choose Texas Chainsaw Massacre to be our Sinister Spotlight for this episode, other than subjecting me to watching Leatherface dry hump some poor girl with his chainsaw?
I had to get revenge on you for Diary of a Cannibal
Ah,
somehow.
the
Jose is personally responsible for me seeing one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life.
Not true. I don't know what he's talking about. I'm pretty sure that no. I'd like to see your birth certificate. I'm diverting the controversy here. I want to see your birth certificate. I think there's something up with that.
And photos. Basically, like I said, the reason I summed it up is because this movie's starting to get a cult following, but I think it could get a lot bigger of one. I think it certainly deserves one. And I kind of already said this, but yeah, if there's the franchise is so bad, I think people just automatically disregard everything after the first one, as a matter of course. But you know, if there's one message to this thing, it's not that the conversation shouldn't end on this particular movie with "it's different." The conversation is "it's different," but I think yeah, sure they didn't do. It's nowhere near what the first one was, but that's not the end of the conversation on this movie. It does a lot of interesting stuff. It's got a lot of just creative, fun, very singular horror in it, and I think it deserves a bigger audience than it has. And I think a larger audience would certainly embrace this movie than has.
Right. Well, that was beautiful, man. But
yeah,
no.
The most beautiful one's about the dry humping of the chainsaw. But
Yeah.
Do we just want to talk a little bit about the road that this series went down after Tobe Hooper's departure?
You know what? I think that would be a pretty good path to take with this particular series being as it is. Yeah, let's just take a little time to discuss the epilogue of this particular movie here.
The epilogue would be the proper word for it. Well, you got this franchise has been unusually lucky in retroactively casting famous people.
Yeah, right.
Right after this one, you have they kind of were like Tobe Hooper. Well, don't call us, we'll call you. And somehow New Line ended up with the rights to the film, and they decided to make Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 Leatherface. Ignoring the fact that the entire Sawyer clan was murdered at the end, and giving him like this new family. It's basically like a reboot, but this is back when remakes were verboten for some reason. So they basically just call it Part 3 anyway. Doesn't make any sense. And it's most famous nowadays for the trailer which ripped off Excalibur and had Leatherface grabbing the chainsaw from out of the lake. And you know what? Enjoy that scene while it lasts, because that's the best part of the movie.
The trailer, that's saying something.
It was a really ill-fated film. When there's no other word for it. It just started out. It's not a very good film, and then what happened was it was like released in 1990 or something, and basically it was. The MPAA had never been as uptight about horror stuff as they were, because it was basically this reaction to the slasher boom, where the slasher boom got the counteraction, and suddenly the MPAA wouldn't let shit fly at all. So this movie, which wasn't very good in the first place, ended up getting really cut. And it so badly cut that the director decided to take his name off of it and petition for an Alan Smithy, which he got. But the problem was that Elon had already printed out the first reel, which had his name on it. So basically, yeah, we're not going to reprint 1,000 copies of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 Leatherface for you. So you're staying on the film.
It's a fate worse than death.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I just said it's a fate worse than death.
Right, true. And then to add insult to injury, when the big DVD boom came out, they called they were putting out special editions of everything. They called him up to see if he wanted to reconstruct his cut. So he was down, and he comes over and he finds that the footage had been so manhandled, so poorly treated, that it had literally just disintegrated. It was unusable.
Oh my god!
So he wasn't even able to reconstruct it. However, that which didn't stop them, by the way, from slapping on an unrated sticker onto it and calling it the director's cut, just to kick him in the balls.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Wow, that's like you mentioned with Sally. That is one character that you just have to sympathize with after everything they've been through.
So basically they, and I guess like it's literally like a 40 seconds of footage, and it's not even gore footage. It's just like weird footage, but that footage has technically not been rated by the MPAA, so they can call it the unrated cut. And so it's pretty terrible. But my favorite thing about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, probably the worst insult was, and I like it even better than like Viggo Mortensen in this movie, and I love me some Viggo. But they basically, this was during the era of the great test screening era, and so they test the movie in some mall in Milwaukee or whatever, and they say, the audience didn't like Ken Foree dying because hey, let's face it, who does like Ken Foree dying? Everyone loves Ken Foree.
Yeah.
So he goes, okay, so they're like, yeah, we're gonna need to have you make him alive, and so the director goes, well, okay, that's fine. Just give me a little bit of money, and I'll reshoot his death scene. And he goes, they're like, no, we're not going to do that. That shit's expensive. We're just going to have you shoot him popping up at the end alive again. And he goes, did you see this fucking movie? Ken Foree gets his head sawed in half by a chainsaw. I don't know any alternative takes. There's not one where he falls down. He just gets straight up sawed to death on camera. And they're like, the people who are going to see your movie are horror fans who don't know shit from Shinola. They make him live again. And so if you watch the movie, you will see Ken Foree just straight up get his ass murdered and then pop up just clean as a whistle again at the end with absolutely no explanation.
And who needs one? Like I was... it's apparent that, there was just no more room in hell, so Ken Foree naturally had to come back. True horror fans would get that, but, I could see where some of the more logical viewers would think that it didn't make sense. As long as Ken Foree came back to life in time to get ice cream, then I don't see why we should be complaining.
Yeah, and then there's another great missed opportunity with Ken Foree. One of the many, many, many missed opportunities in this film in part 3, where Ken Foree is playing a survivalist, and so when shit starts to go crazy, he basically turns to his two protagonists, to his two the people he's stuck with, and he goes, man, right over the hill, if I can only get there, are all my buddies. They're at like a big survivalist camp, and they got guns and shit, and it'd be crazy. And so you kind of go like, oh man, well that's kind of a neat twist. It's kind of a cool idea, like actual crazy survivalists who want to live and are really well trained, and have them fight the Sawyer. See how the psycho killers react to someone who can actually fight back. Well, that's not something I've seen in a movie before. That'll be really interesting. Never mentioned again, because survivalists stay over the hill? Like, keep, like, going, so, when are the survivalists going to get here? Oh, you mean they're not coming, huh? Okay. But you ran out of money for the gas. It's just one of the biggest missed opportunities in horror. It cracks me up.
God, there sounds like there's quite. I'm sorry, I can't get over the image of Ken Foree getting his skull sawed in half, and then just coming back at the end. No, it's all right, gang. No worries.
It's basically that. He like pops back and goes, "Hey, it's me, Ken Foree," and like the surviving girl comes and gives her a hug, and like that's the end.
That is just
it's
too much.
The world's most half-assed resurrection.
Oh God, that is priceless. I would probably maybe watch that movie for free just to see that little snippet. It sounds like pure gold.
Gold it is, my friends. Gold it is. Well, and then after the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 came the infamous Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, which I have never seen, and from what I've heard, I'm not necessarily missing a lot, except for Renee Zellweger being shrill and Matthew McConaughey acting crazy. So,
yeah, same here. I have not seen it either, so there are definite. I'm not scheduling a weekend anytime soon for a night out with the girls, and then a little Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation to cap off our fun-filled evening.
From what I hear, that movie takes Leatherface's sexual from part 2 and just runs with it. Like, he's cross-dressing, he's wearing lipstick, he's wearing a dress and stuff, and you just go, man, he's that's one messed up boy, Leatherface. That's one messed up boy.
As long as he isn't dancing to Goodbye Horses, I think it may not seem quite so bad.
And then the Platinum Dunes films, I have made my opinion quite clear. To recap, the first is awful, the second is awful and also boring and doubly pointless. Because even though like I hate the first Platinum Dunes one, I kind of understand the thinking behind it, of dating or whatever. And it's bullshit, but it's bullshit that I can wrap my mind around. What I can't wrap my mind around is a movie that literally is that promises to be the big prequel, that promises to have all the answers, and it literally does nothing. There is nothing in Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the beginning that would that has any interesting myth making in it at all. Basically, the myth making is, oh yeah, slaughterhouse closed down, so we basically decided to start eating people. And Leatherface, he saw this saw that was laying over there on the stump, and he picked it up and was like, hey, I got a saw now. This saw might come in handy. And that's the fucking movie.
Wow, you're telling me this is why I've been missing out on all these years?
Yeah, exactly. And now, of course, like we have mentioned, we are promised / threatened with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3D, which will, like I said, not even be sticking with the original shitty reboot, but will be rebooting the shitty reboot. And I have to say, I am mystified. I am mystified by how these movies keep coming back. Because, look, I don't necessarily condone, but I can understand wanting to remake, say, Halloween or Friday the 13th or Nightmare, although I'm one of the few Halloween apologists, but that's another podcast.
Definitely.
But I get the impulse, and as I was saying earlier, I can understand why, because the 80s gave us so many great monsters, I can understand why there are so many sequels, and why you would build franchises around it, why you basically think that you can tell stories about these monsters. And the term telling stories is probably pretty generous for what the studio executives who sponsor these have in mind. I mean, a more honest appraisal would be why you'd still want to make money off of these franchises. But the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's, as we say in the beginning, it is the ultimate one-off. It is, You can't repeat that. You can't replicate that. People have been trying for years and failing, and it's itself. It's one of, and I think Tobe Hooper's career has proved, it's basically one of the greatest, if not the greatest, accident in cinema. That movie is made because a particular time and a particular place and a particular group of filmmakers came together, and that equation, for whatever reason, created something powerful. It created one of the most powerful depictions of horror ever, and nothing about it says that you need to follow it up. There's no stinger. There's no Freddy, popping up and driving the car.
Yeah.
There's no Michael Myers, getting off the lawn. There's no Jason popping out of the water. There is no reason that past Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1, there should be any more of the story. There's no... And did something completely different. But the idea of them keep milking this just mystifies me.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's one of those just kind of perfect moments in time, and I loved how you compared the endings of other quote unquote successful franchises where they have had that zinger at the end, but the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it basically ends exactly like what it is, a nightmare. It's as if you just woke up and you don't need to have that continued any longer, and if the movie has really done its job, you don't want it to.
Exactly.
But
I don't think anyone watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre for the first time really wants to see the continuing adventures of Leatherface,
Yeah.
So give up, Hollywood, please.
Yeah, just quit while you're ahead, and you're really not even
that
ahead
was a
anymore.
while ago. That ship has sailed.
Well, hopefully we can only keep our fingers crossed for the adequate. I can't even say the best at this point. We can only hope for the adequate, and just pray by the end of this 3D nonsense that Leatherface will finally rest in a long-awaited grave. For now, anyway.
Yeah, hopefully his dry humping days will be over.
No, I don't think those will ever end. Well, man, Bryce, I really enjoyed talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 and all of its wackier counterparts with you today.
It's been a blast, Isaiah. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, no problem at all. And for those of you listening, please stop by Bryce's place on the interwebs. It's Things That Don't Suck. This guy has one of, like I've said before, he has one of the most eclectic tastes in movies that you are likely to come by. So if you are somebody who just loves cinema and who loves everything from beautiful visual orchestrations to dry humping psychos, then Bryce is your man. He'll set you up. So again, thank you so much, Bryce, for joining us today on Sinister Spotlight.
Anytime, sir. Anytime.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.